And we are live. Welcome to webinar 1 of our series, looking at, amongst other things, my research. Let's get people in to this event. Make sure that everything is okay.
I'm hoping people have been able to carve out a part of their day, maybe over their lunch break today, just spend a bit of time with us, time to step back and think about practice as we're starting this new year so that we can really be as effective as we can be. And that's what we're hoping this series of webinars will do.
Well, I'm pretty confident, Linda, that the stream is working.
Okay.
So I think we can crack on.
Yeah. So a very warm welcome to all of you joining us live today, and also to those of you who will be watching the video recording afterwards. Today we're going to look at a foundational aspect of David's doctoral research in coaching at Oxford Brookes University. And would you like to say a bit more, David, about the topic of today's webinar?
Today's topic is, well, what is coaching, in effect? I mean, let's start right back at the beginning. So for my research, I needed to be clear about what I meant by coaching before I could explore how humor showed up in it. So that meant stepping back from individual models and asking what are experienced coaches actually attending to in real coaching conversations.
Mm-hmm. So what is coaching? But I guess we see that in all of the coaching books, don't we?
We do, and that is part of the issue in that all of the books that you, I, and everyone watching this has is that most coaching books are coming from a specific area, field, approach, if you like, to coaching. So exec coaching, developmental coaching, transformational coaching, whatever we want to call it. And then each of those are drawing on different theories. So Gestalt, cognitive behavioral, person-centered, whatever. And so my research was not focused in one single approach, one of those. So instead I was looking at instead of choosing one model, I was looking across all of the literature and all of the coaching practice to see what kept coming up so that I could have a agnostic view of coaching.
And what did you notice when you did that?
So lots of differences, as you'd expect, but there were similar things, similar elements or areas that kept showing up. Topics like presence, curiosity, trust, neutrality, empowerment, all of the things that you would expect to see in any coaching book. And then what emerged were, well, I called them 4 key areas. I think since the research, I feel a better title is fields of attention, because 4 areas might imply that they were sequential, whereas fields of attention, you can kind of see that we might be flicking between one and the other. So these 4 fields of attention that experienced coaches seem to move in and out of during a real coaching conversation. So I do have a little image that I prepared earlier, Linda, that I'm showing now. I'm not expecting people to be able to read this all on the screen, but what you're looking at isn't a set of steps or stages, it's this map of attention. So each of these areas is a field, so relationship, etc. And what matters is how you as a coach, or one as a coach, moves between these different fields.
Great. So let's pause here and bring our viewers into the conversation, or also those of you watching on the recording too. When you think about your coaching, what would you say is the field of attention that attracts you most strongly when you're working? So where does your attention mostly go to?
Now, hopefully our comment section is working. Must admit, using a bit of a whizzy new tool. So, well, with fingers crossed here the tests show that it did work, but I just, I'm not going to assume anything. But if you want to stick any comments in the comment section, or you can stick them in through LinkedIn. Let's not dwell too long on this, Linda, though, in case it isn't working as we expected.
Very well. So, David, tell us more about these 4 fields of attention. What did you think were the headlines that you would put on those?
Well, first of all, it's not a framework. It's not a prescriptive framework. I'm using it as a way of describing what's going on. So I'm not saying in this, just as a caveat, I'm not saying that any of these points within these fields is something that coaches should do, or that if they're not doing it, that they're not doing coaching right. That's not at all what this is about. So this was giving a method or a way of being able to reflect on what coaches are doing. And we'll come into where I think it might be useful a bit later, right? So there's basically 4 fields, as you can see from the image, if I bring this back. So there's relationship. So the main question around there is, can this space that we're in this coaching client environment, can it hold the work that we're going to do? We've then got support, where we're looking at, is the client capable, or are they resourced sufficiently to be able to engage? Inquiry, I've then lumped a few things together, but it's about what needs to be clarified, explored, challenged, those kind of things. And then transformational progress looks at what is changing, what's shifting, what's the new situation we're in. And as I said, they're not sequential, they're happening simultaneously, potentially, with attention moving between them. And today we're going to look at 2 of them. So we're going to look at the 2 that are foundational, I suppose, for any conversation. So relationship and support, which again, we'll go into more of my research and findings later on in the webinar series. Linda, you've got to keep me in check, just not let me run off and start to try and cover everything. Otherwise we'll be here for 12 days straight. But yeah, first of all, we're going to look at the relationship and the support.
Yeah, okay. So let's focus in on that first of the 4 areas. And you mentioned that the relationship's about asking ourselves whether the space in which we are together and connected to each other can hold the work that we want to do together. So please tell us a bit more about that, David.
Okay, well, so the problem I had in the research, again, I'm not going to go off too far, but the problem I had is that no one had looked at humor in research. Humor in coaching. So I was looking at what is coaching, and I was then also looking at what is humor in other environments. So sticking with the coaching, though, what I noticed is that lots and lots of authors were saying, the relationship is a key success factor. Okay? And that was pretty much agreed throughout most of the literature, and some saying, this is the most important thing. But the similar topics kept coming up, and the 4 that I've used as kind of the team leaders, if you like, in relationships are presence, and I've zoomed into some of these so you can see them a bit easier, trust, bonding, and then this other part, responsibility, which I've put at the end. So I'm going to go through each of those and have a look at them, starting with presence. Okay, so I'll bring presence back up. So at a basic level, this is I, the coach, am here with you, the client. And my research was looking at just the dyad between coach and client. So it wasn't group coaching, wasn't team coaching, it was just looking at one-on-one. But this applies pretty much to groups and teams, I'd say, as well. So at a basic level, it's saying I am present with you, I'm here with you. But then there's a psychological element as well, saying that, I'm fully attentive to you, the client, to your thinking, to your emotions, to what is coming up. And it's noticing that stuff that we talk about in coach education, which is noticing tone, noticing pace, noticing what is being said, but also noticing what's not being said, and essentially moving away from me focus as the coach, focused on my own head, rather than focusing on me. I'm focusing on the client. And there's just preempting where I'm going in a later webinar. There's something quite interesting came up in terms of that as coach educators, we often say the focus is on the client. The focus is on the client. The focus is on the client. It's not about us, the coach. But I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a teaser there that something came up in the study about that.
Yes, and I think you're really hitting there on one of the big tensions in coaching, that we're supposed to be absolutely focused on our client, and yet we're also supposed to be self-reflective at the same time. So how do you hold those two things in tension?
Yeah, which is a problem, right? We can't. It's a bit like trying to look at those images where is the horse running forwards or backwards, right? You can't see both of the things at the same time. It's not quite as impossible as that, but it is one of those challenges in coaching where we can't fully focus on our client and focus on ourselves. So we talk about reflection and reflexivity, thinking about what's going on in this relationship, but also what am I bringing here? So reflection is important. But if a coach is looking too much inwardly, so they're too overly inward focused, that presence with the client suffers. So an experienced coach learns to manage that balance in the moment rather than trying to hold everything at the same time.
Yes, I think it's absolutely one of the key skills of coaching, that we learn to cycle between the noticing them, noticing us, and all the things that happen between those two things. It's a real skill that builds over time, for sure. So that covers presence. So the next one you talked about was the question of trust. And I can imagine that presence and trust have got a close connection. Can you say more about that?
They do, yeah. Trust essential. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue with that. In terms of any relationship, we've got that trust. So especially important for coaching. No surprise to anyone who's done pretty much any coaching education, I would have thought. But clients, we're asking them to be very open. We're asking them to share lots of stuff with us. They're not going to take the risks or explore uncomfortable situations if they don't have the trust. Right? So trust, very practical elements such as psychological safety, confidentiality that we're also bringing as the coach, being consistent. If we say we're going to do something, then we do it, but also how we are. And there's a significantly important element here about authenticity, and we talk about congruence and authenticity a lot in coaching, and clients are incredibly sensitive to whether or not this relationship is feeling authentic. So that's all wrapped up in that trust bundle. I'm just going to add that although I've put all of these elements together into this image, there is no suggestion that this is the correct or the only order that these things can go in. I put them because I needed to make sense of how these all fitted together. You and everyone else watching this could easily have put them into a different order. So they are more for a reflective moment rather than is that in the right place. So when I say, for example, authenticity is related to trust, someone else might well say, well, I think it's more related to presence. That's not that's not an argument that we need to have.
Okay. No, I think it's making a very coherent picture for me. And I must say that my experience of coaching is a degree of awe and wonder, really, that people are prepared to put their trust in you and to be so open. And when they can do that, it really does create that space for wonderful transformations to happen. So establishing that environment of trust is absolutely important. So moving on to your third area then, you've mentioned bonding, and I can imagine that both presence and trust might have a kind of directional element to them that then lead to bonding. So please tell us about what bonding means to you.
Yeah, and I think you're right in what you're implying, if not staying there, is that these can be, and I do visualize them in the thesis as a pyramid, because without presence, you're not going to have trust. Without trust, you're not going to have bonding, and so on. So bonding, I included quite a few things in here and took it apart a bit later on in the thesis, but it's that, how connected are we? What degree of connectedness you might have. A word that often is used in literature is about rapport. And I am very much more inclined to go with was it Jenny Rogers or Julie Starr? I'd have to check my notes on that. Who described rapport as being like a thermometer. So there's a scale on it, rather than having we have rapport or we don't have rapport, which some literature suggests that. So the thermometer idea is that everybody has rapport with everybody else, but in some it's a cold rapport, and some it has warmth, comfort, affinity, that sense of sameness. And so let's think of it as a spectrum rather than just as a binary thing. But that sense of sameness is important in coaching. It seems to come through a lot again when we're talking about humor, which we'll go on to later. But this sense that we're similar has a recurring importance in terms of trust as well, because if we feel that someone is like us, then we feel that closeness. And that comes from everything from a shared language, shared values, shared energy, ways of being. It's the sense that people are like us. And when we feel that people are like us, we feel there's less of a threat. And so again, that builds into that trust. So as a natural occurrence, what happens is when rapport is really strong, when it's a warm rapport, people naturally mirror each other's tone, pace, and body language and stuff like that. And we talk about mirroring as a positive way. I'm not going to get sucked into that debate, but it's in this instance, it's not deliberate. It's just an emerging sign of connection. I'm going to move us on to the last one of these, if I can find my picture, which is responsibility. So this is a bit tagged on. It's a bit quieter than the other things. I've called it responsibility. It could have a number of names, but it includes things like ethics, boundaries, self-management, that reflection and reflexivity we talked about, the awareness of our own biases and things like that. So it's less visible, but it does profoundly shape whether or not this coaching relationship can contain the work that's going to be involved. I did have it as a separate field originally, but it seems to fit quite nicely under relationship. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stick with it.
I certainly like to see it there. I think it represents something that's, again, so important in our work, which is our duty of care to our clients. And so all those things about ethical practice, about creating that safe space, that contained space for people to do the work in, I think it fits in here very, very naturally for me. So those are 4 important fields of attention that you've pointed out here. So I'd just like to pause for a moment and give everyone a little bit of reflective space and ask you just to spend a few moments considering for yourself, of those 4 areas, which are the one where you feel most at home, most strong in. So that's whether you're in the relationship of presence, trust, bonding, or responsibility. Where are you feeling most at home? So just take a moment to have a thought about that. If you want to put something in the chat, that's fine, but you don't have to. I'll just give you a few moments of reflective time. And once you've felt that affinity to the one where you're feeling most at home at, which is the one that you feel least at home at? Maybe you're finding this question of responsibility as something that causes you a lot of concern, or maybe you're concerned about how good you are at creating that bond with your clients. Where do you feel least at home? So, David, what's the key takeaways from this question of the field of attention of the relationship?
So that it's not something you just do at the start. You know how much I like our discussions about contracting and setting up the environment, and we've had many a fun chat about that over the years. But this relationship is not just something you establish at the start. However much I love talking about contracting, yes, it does get established at the start, and then we move on. But it's something that we're constantly tending to, even if you're not doing it actively. It's being developed, and so it can be, that thermometer can be going colder as well as warmer all of the time. So whether we are attending to it consciously, that this is still being developed, I'm going to say, right? And whether that's in a positive or a negative way. So I think that question that you've just asked there, Linda, that's on that banner is worth a consideration. If I know we've not given you a lot of time because we don't want to have big pauses on a video for other people watching it, but if you are watching a recording, I would pause the video and just spend 5 minutes thinking about this, because it's not just something we do and move on in the coaching environment.
Great.
Talking about let's move on. Let's move on then.
Okay, then. So let's shift our attention now to that second support field, the second field of attention that you've identified, which is that of support.
Okay. So I've lumped quite a lot together in this. In fact, there's the lack of multiple little things going off it. I don't want you to think that it's not important. I mean, support is one of the things that nearly every coaching book, if you look at it, talks about. Coaching is a combination of support and challenge. Right? I mean, I've even said it myself as well. So before we go on, though, let's just have a pause for what does support mean for you. When I say support, if we were doing this in a learning environment and I said support, what kind of words would you think of? And I reckon the words that have come to your minds now are things like empathy, safety, encouragement. But I bet none of you have thought, it's about fixing someone or advising someone. Right? So support, again, I like to think of that connection when someone says, you meet a friend and they say they've just been dumped by their partner. They don't want to hear you solving that problem. Oh, don't worry, there's plenty more fish in the sea. Or, oh, I know a friend I could fix it. They don't want that. They want you to be there and support. So it's that kind of support that we're talking about rather than fixing, which I don't think will be a surprise for anyone if they've, again, done any coaching education or done real coaching. So people are generally describing, or authors, the literature is generally describing support as something that's relational. It's enabling the client to be able to talk about these difficult topics, and rather than directive, right? So that's how we'd expect it to be. And in this framework, in the illustration I've got, support is kind of to the left of the inquiry deliberately, and underneath it, because it's often coming first before we can have those inquiry and those challenges and the explorations and stuff. We need to have that support, and that very much came through in the research, that if you've not got the support there, you're not going to have those difficult conversations. You're not going to be able to explore the uncertain or the emotional or anything like that.
I'm guessing some people might have come up with encouragement or even cheerleading as they were thinking about that question of support. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I'm there with encouragement. That also connects through. You can see a little line going off here from support, because this also goes about that sense of achievement, which we're going to talk about in the subsequent webinar when we get to transformational growth, and we talk about the challenging and the inquiry as well. And it goes further. So yes, and it's encouragement, and it goes further. So it does include, what I've put in here is empathy, the acknowledgement, normalizing emotions, reducing anxiety. We've got all of those kind of things in here. So it's and an image is often used in the literature. It's about staying alongside the client. So we're holding that space with them to be able to look at things. So I think that's quite a familiar metaphor that comes up in coaching literature.
Yes, I can see how support's really valuable for the client. How do we recognise as coaches when our clients are looking for or needing more support from us?
Yeah, so this is this indirect, right? They might be doing things like minimizing their emotions or avoiding the topics. And again, this is so linked to the findings in the research. So there were, just to kind of frame this, there were lots of things where the research supported the literature, and there were some things where it didn't quite support, or it threw something up as a different. The support, as we'll go through in more detail later on, is it definitely showed up that humor mirrored that whole situation with support. So, for example, minimizing emotions or avoiding the topics. Again, humor is a great way to avoid a topic, right? Or to minimize an emotion, or to kind of say, oh, I'm okay with this. So there is, in response to your question, how do we know? We can spot those things, and we can look out for those things, such as, is the client avoiding it? Are they minimizing how important it was, or what impact it had, and those things? And they're things for us not to just move on from, but they're signals for us to slow down and work with the client to see what's going on.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned that we often see in the literature support alongside challenge. So how do you see those two things in relation?
Yeah, I mean, connected, definitely not the same. But it's not just a case of support or challenge, right? I mean, there are two different illustration blobs in the fields diagram. But you've got, in support, you still have challenge, right? If we think about accountability, right, as an adult to adult, coach to client relationship, right? The client owns those, but there's an element of challenge in there, potentially, depending on how you've contracted with your clients. And yeah, support it's very close and kind of goes into a merge. Maybe I should have some kind of muddy brown color when these two things merge in those fields, because our support, sometimes our best way to support people is to start challenging them and start engaging them with inquiry. So I feel that that's a bit of a segue into our next area, but we're going to look at that in our next webinar.
Yeah, thank you, David, so much. So we've talked today about the relationship and about support. What can our viewers look forward to next time when they join us for our next webinar?
Oh, so much more exciting stuff like this. So we're going to look at the inquiry, which has got those three areas of challenge and exploration and clarification stuff. And then also what I've called transformational progress, because it's not all about goals, as some people might be surprised by. But what is it that coaching is actually trying to achieve? There's a big old blob there for us to look at as well. So that's what we're going to share next time, along with how this is useful to you as a coach. What are you going to take away and do with this stuff? So we're going to look more into that. But hopefully people have realized that even just by looking at this diagram and saying, okay, how am I doing in this? Like the question you asked, Linda, which of these am I spending more of my attention on? Which ones am I focusing on least? As having that kind of that reflection oneself. So I'm going to share this digital version of the illustration so that people can zoom in and look at it, because it doesn't come across maybe as beautifully on here when you're looking out from such a macro level. So I will put a link to that in the notes on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, David, so much for sharing what you've learned from your doctoral research. And I'm hoping that everyone will find this useful in their practice, whether you're working as a coach, as a leader, or as a professional. Having these tools to your armory is really going to help you be much more effective. It would be great to keep the conversation going, so I'd like to invite you all to continue the discussion back on LinkedIn with some comments, and we'd love to get some likes as well for this video. And if you weren't able to catch the whole thing as fully as you would like, then please do log back in and you should be able to find the recording on LinkedIn.
One last question, Linda. When is that next webinar?
So as you can see, our next webinar is going to be next Tuesday, 20th of January at 11 o'clock in the morning. Please do register for it, and we look forward to seeing you all then.
I do have one last request for people. So research never ends. Don't tell my wife, but I'm doing some more research. So this humour research that I've done already was within coaching, and it was looking at people within the UK, so working and living in the UK. Trying to now see how this all relates globally. So I would like a few thousand people, but let's start one by one, to fill out a questionnaire I've got. So here is a link. You can either go on the bit.ly humour-quiz or do the QR code. But you don't have to be a coach, and even better if you could share with others and say, hey, be part of this. There's a link at the end of the questionnaire, and it should only take you 5 minutes. There's only 18 questions, I think, is where I've ended up with. There's a link at the end where you can volunteer to join a subscriber list to hear about the research. But this questionnaire, this survey is anonymous. So there is no way of recording who's put what in there. So please join it. Please sign up to the subscriber list, but you don't have to. Right, I'm going to stop putting all of the adverts in now, Linda. And I'm going to say thank you very much, Linda, for giving me a bit of a quizzing. And I look forward to seeing you all next time.
Yep, see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.